Chapter 1. A portrait turned Hercule Poirot, that fastidious little Belgian with the egg-shaped head and immaculate moustaches, was sipping his chocolate chaud one grey morning in early November when the envelope arrived. It bore no return address, but the handwriting on the front, neat, angular, and faintly old-fashioned, struck him as familiar, though he could not place it at once. Miss Lemon, who never allowed unsolicited interruptions to Poirot's routine, without due cause, had placed it on his desk with a slight frown. "It was hand-delivered, Monsieur Poirot," she said, "by a boy who vanished before I could ask anything more than his name, if indeed it was his real name." Poirot looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Ah, you suspect intrigue, Miss Lemon? A touch of the clandestine?" She did not smile. "I suspect misdirection." Poirot picked up the envelope delicately, turning it over. It was sealed with a small square of marbled blue wax, unadorned. Inside was a single sheet of creamy writing paper, no letterhead, no signature. "Monsieur Poirot, I do not know if what I have seen is a mistake, a warning, or a message. But the portrait of Lord Coniston has been inverted. No one will admit to doing it. The house is silent, but it feels like someone is watching us. Please come." A friend of the family Poirot read the note 3 times before setting it down. "Inverted," he murmured. "A portrait turned upside down. And in such an esteemed household, non?" He looked up at Miss Lemon. "What do you know of Lord Coniston?" Miss Lemon was already consulting her leather-bound index of people, properties, and titled English, eccentrics, a system of her own design which often proved more reliable than Who's Who. "Coniston Hall," she said after a moment, "an ancestral estate in Oxfordshire. The current Lord Coniston is Arthur Wincombe, 5th to bear the title. His wife died 5 years ago. No known scandal. Known for hunting, charities, and watercolours. Rather dull, if I may say so." Poirot tapped the letter. Dull, perhaps, until someone decides to speak in symbols. Hastings, entering just then with his usual stride and cheer, caught the end of Poirot's sentence. "Symbols? Are we solving riddles at breakfast now?" Poirot handed him the note. After a moment's reading, Hastings frowned. "Inverted portrait? That's just some servant's prank." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but would a mere prank summon Hercule Poirot in such cryptic fashion?" Hastings gave a small shrug. "You're intrigued, then?" Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Mon ami, I am not yet intrigued, but I am aware. And awareness, as you know, is the first step toward uncovering what lies beneath the ordinary." It was the next afternoon when Poirot and Hastings arrived at Coniston Hall. The estate emerged from the mist like a memory half-formed, a great, sprawling edifice of grey stone and ivy, with a square tower at its rear and windows like solemn eyes. The drive curved through naked oaks and leaf-strewn lawns, ending before a wide gravel courtyard where a footman waited in traditional livery. They were shown into a drawing-room of significant age and elegance. Oak panels, oil portraits, heavy curtains, and at its centre, on the far wall above the mantel, hung a single painting. A man in formal dress, blue sash, long stern face, thin-lipped mouth. Lord Coniston, painted in 1883. Upside down, the effect was immediate, disconcerting. Though everything in the room was orderly, the presence of the portrait, inverted and uncorrected, felt like a defiance of order itself. Poirot studied it in silence for several moments, not crooked, entirely reversed. "Yes, sir," said a voice behind them. They turned to see a man enter, tall and composed, with silver hair and a walking stick of dark mahogany. "Arthur Wincombe," he said, "the 5th Lord Coniston." Poirot inclined his head. "Hercule Poirot, at your service." Lord Coniston gestured to the chairs. "Thank you for coming. I confess I had no idea someone had contacted you." "Not your doing?" "Certainly not, though I now suspect it may have been my niece." "Your niece?" "Annabel. She's 23, headstrong, imaginative. She arrived last week from Cambridge and has been quite taken with the portrait's mystery." Poirot smiled gently. "Then it is a mystery in your eyes as well, my lord." Wincombe sighed. "It is something. I cannot explain it. It appeared this way 3 days ago. We assumed a servant's error, but when questioned, none would admit to moving it, and no one claims to have been in the room after dinner, when it must have occurred." Hastings interjected. "Could it have slipped, fallen, and been rehung wrongly?" "Not likely. It's fixed with brass mounts, requires a ladder, and 2 hands, and it was quite steady when we found it." Poirot rose and approached the painting. "May I?" "Of course." Poirot examined the frame. The screws had been unscrewed and retightened. No signs of damage, no scratches on the panelling. The cords had been reattached expertly. Whoever had done it with purpose and care. He or she turned back to Wincombe. "And you have told me no one else in the house claims responsibility?" "No. Only the family and our closest staff are in residence. Myself, my niece Annabel, my younger brother Edmund, my cousin Margaret Talbot, and Dr. Howard, an old friend of the family staying a fortnight. Staff includes the butler, Loring, and 2 maids. That's all." Poirot nodded. "Then, if you would permit me, I would like to speak with them all, one by one." Wincombe raised an eyebrow. "Do you really believe this demands such attention?" Poirot smiled. "My lord, when someone decides to speak in silence, one must listen very carefully indeed." Annabel Wincombe was the first to be interviewed. She was quick-witted, intense, and clearly amused by Poirot's presence. "I didn't write the hail note," she said, "but I wanted to. I was just too shy, I suppose. The whole thing is so wonderfully Gothic, like something out of a Wilkie Collins novel. You did not attempt to solve the mystery yourself?" Poirot asked. "Oh, I tried. I asked everyone. No one will admit it. But I know it wasn't random. The portrait, my great-great-grandfather, was famously proud, stern, nearly disinherited his own son for marrying beneath him. Turning him upside down feels like revenge." "Or protest," Poirot murmured. "Exactly." Next came Edmund Wincombe, a man of 60, thin and fidgety, with a book of poetry under one arm. He looked baffled by the situation. "It wasn't me. I don't meddle in symbols, and I've no time for family theatrics. I stay here because I prefer quiet, and Arthur doesn't pester me." Poirot noted the fingers ink-stained. "You write? Badly? I'd rather write about ghosts than become one." Poirot smiled thinly. "Let us hope neither occurs." Margaret Talbot, the cousin, was a woman in her early 40s with hawkish features and a clipped manner. She dismissed the incident as a childish prank. Annabel's bored. The others are relics. Someone wanted excitement. Poirot raised an eyebrow. You think it insignificant? Oh, don't misunderstand. It means something. Just not what you think. Some people in this house carry more guilt than they admit. Guilt? But she waved him off. You'll see. Dr. Howard was last. Quiet, thoughtful, and sharply observant. A man with clear eyes and no time for nonsense. I've known the family 30 years, he said. There's always been a tension here, things unspoken. That painting, Coniston III, was a tyrant by all accounts. His portrait dominates the room. Turning it is not merely cheek. It is statement. Poirot studied him. A statement by whom? I couldn't say, but it's no accident. Someone here wanted him to fall, even if only from the wall. Poirot left the room in silence. He returned once more to the drawing-room, stood again before the painting. Behind him, Hastings watched quietly. Well, he said, what do you make of it? Poirot's eyes were fixed on the upside-down face of the third Lord Coniston. I make of it, Hastings, he said, a cry muffled in manners, and I fear this is only the beginning. Chapter 2. Whispers at the Hearth. The wind rattled the leaded windows of Coniston Hall that night, and Poirot, wrapped in his velvet robe, seated by the fire in the guest lounge, was deep in thought. The portrait, still inverted above the drawing-room mantel, had not been touched. Lord Coniston insisted it remain as it was until Poirot completed his investigation. A house that accepts disarray so willingly, Poirot murmured to Hastings, who sat nursing a pipe nearby, is either remarkably progressive or deeply afraid. Hastings frowned. You think someone's frightened? I think, Poirot said, that someone is trying to speak, but without saying a word. At that moment, a soft knock sounded at the door. Miss Annabel Wincombe entered, her dark coat buttoned to the throat, a scarf around her neck though she was indoors. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes alert. I'm sorry to intrude, she said, but I found something. I thought you ought to see it. Poirot rose immediately. But of course, mademoiselle. She produced a small, dusty volume from beneath her coat and handed it to him, a leather-bound family ledger. I took it from the library, she said. I know I shouldn't have, but no one's looked at it in years. It belonged to the third Lord Coniston, Algernon, the man in the portrait. Poirot took the book carefully. Inside, in spidery handwriting, were dates and names, births, deaths, marriages. But several entries were scratched through, angrily and unevenly. In one, a name, Caroline Wincombe, had been inked out with a thick black slash. Caroline Wincombe? Poirot asked. Annabel nodded. His daughter, Algernon's only child. She hesitated, then added, she was disinherited for marrying a painter. A painter? Hastings said with mild surprise. An Italian, Annabel said. Enzo Morelli. Very talented, not titled. Algernon never forgave her. She died young. Consumption, I think. He never attended the funeral. Poirot turned to a second page, earlier in the book. Here was the portrait commission itself. June 3rd, 1883. Final sitting for oil portrait by G.T. Prescott. Hung in drawing room by Lord's order. No reproductions allowed. No likeness to be copied. Poirot tapped the note. No reproductions. Curious. He hated having his image duplicated. Annabel said. Paranoia, they say. Poirot looked up. And where did Caroline's husband go after her death? Annabel paused. Italy. But some say he left a painting behind, hidden somewhere in the hall. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, a painter, a secret, a buried child. He handed the book back. Merci, mademoiselle. You have illuminated more than you know. After she left, Hastings leaned forward. Do you think this has something to do with the portrait being turned? Poirot's gaze was steady. I think, mon ami, that the portrait is not merely a protest, but a correction. A correction. Poirot stood and walked to the hearth, his voice low. Someone is reminding us that this house honours the wrong ancestor, that the legacy on the wall was built on cruelty, that Caroline, erased from the family records, has returned. Hastings blinked. You think a ghost is involved? Poirot smiled. No, but guilt, Hastings. Guilt is the closest thing to a ghost in a family. It haunts from within. The next morning, Poirot asked Lord Coniston to assemble the household in the library. They arrived in staggered fashion. Annabel alert and pale, Edmund distracted and absent-minded, Margaret Talbot arms folded tightly, and Dr. Howard ever watchful. Loring the butler stood at the rear, and behind him 2 maids in pressed uniforms kept silent. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his fingers delicately joined. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, the portrait of Lord Algernon has been inverted. We agree this was no accident. The question is, why, and by whom? There was silence. Poirot continued. I propose that the act was not vandalism. It was history, rearranged. Someone in this house believes Algernon should no longer preside over your lives. Someone who remembers Caroline Winkham, her erasure, her grief. Lord Coniston's face remained blank. Annabel's eyes were wet. Dr. Howard was the first to speak. I've said it before. The portrait should have been taken down long ago. He was a cruel man. He built the estate, Margaret Talbot snapped. He destroyed his own daughter, Howard replied. Edmund Winkham spoke without looking up. He disinherited Caroline. She died poor. Her son never set foot here. Poirot turned. Her son! Annabel spoke now. Enzo Morelli and Caroline had a child, a boy. They named him Luca. He was born in England but raised abroad after her death. Poirot's eyes sharpened. A living descendant? Yes, Annabel said quietly. But no one here ever acknowledged him. Poirot's voice was soft. Then the line did not die. It was simply hidden. Lord Coniston stood. This is ancient history, he said. We can't be expected to unearth every branch of a broken family tree. Poirot turned toward him, voice sharper now. On the contrary, my lord, it seems one of those branches may have found its way back. Coniston froze. Back? Poirot approached the fireplace. The staff received a new gardener last month. Italian, quiet, keeps to himself. His name, I believe, is Lucio Morelli. Coniston's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? Poirot turned to Hastings. You recall the name of Caroline's husband? Hastings nodded. Enzo Morelli. Exactly. Poirot faced the others. Lucio Morelli is the anglicized form. I checked the parish records. Luca Morelli was born in 1903, Caroline Wincomb's only son. He paused. And Lucio Morelli is 37. Annabel covered her mouth. Lord Coniston sat heavily in a nearby chair. My God! Poirot's voice lowered. I believe he came not for revenge, but to see the house his mother was banished from. The portrait was his way of making her absence visible, of asking, without words, why she was forgotten. There was silence. Then Margaret Talbot stood suddenly. I thought he looked familiar, she said, but I didn't place it. Poirot nodded. The resemblance is to Caroline. Strong. The same eyes. Dr. Howard looked down at his hands. And now what? Poirot let out a breath. That depends on whether this house is willing to remember what it tried to forget. Lord Coniston said nothing, but it was Annabel who stood next. I'd like to meet him, she said, to walk the grounds with him, show him the library, the gallery. Poirot smiled. A reconciliation, mademoiselle. No, she said, a welcome. That afternoon, Poirot requested a private meeting with Lucio Morelli, who arrived in the tool shed behind the west wing at the agreed time. He was quiet, soft-spoken, with deep-set eyes and worn hands. When Poirot greeted him, in Italian he responded fluently. Yes, he said after a moment, I am Caroline's son. And the portrait? I turned it. I had to. I thought no one would care, but perhaps someone might notice. Poirot placed a hand gently on his shoulder. They noticed. Lucio lowered his head. I didn't mean to disturb. No, monsieur, Poirot said. You meant to remind. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the woods beyond Coniston Hall, the portrait of Lord Algernon Wincombe was quietly taken down. In its place, at Annabel's insistence, hung a new frame. Empty, for now, but beneath it, engraved in silver, Caroline, Wincombe, 1870-1906. Daughter, artist, mother, banished but not broken. Poirot stood in the doorway, watching the family, what was left of it, gather in quiet reflection. Justice, he said softly, is not always the uncovering of guilt. Sometimes it is the recovery of dignity. Hastings stepped beside him. And the portrait. Poirot smiled faintly. Let it rest. It served its purpose. Chapter 3. The frame left, empty for a few days, calm seemed to descend upon Coniston Hall. The inverted portrait was gone, and in its place now hung a simple empty frame, with Caroline Wincombe's name engraved beneath it. No fanfare had announced its installation. Just Annabel's quiet insistence, and Lord Coniston's reluctant nod. The gesture was meant to restore dignity to the past, yet it seemed to awaken something else entirely. Poirot noticed it first in the silence that followed. A strange quiet, Hastings, he said one morning over breakfast. The kind of hush not of peace, but of withheld breath. Hastings, chewing on a piece of toast, raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, Poirot replied, spreading marmalade with delicate care, that something beneath the surface still resists this reconciliation. And such resistance, it does not sit quietly for long. Indeed, that very afternoon, as Poirot walked the grounds with Miss Annabel Wincombe, ostensibly to inspect the frost damage on the western orchard, he sensed a lingering discomfort in the air, like static before a storm. It was the right thing to do, she said, arms tucked beneath her coat. To take Algernon down, I thought it would bring a kind of closure. But some people, Margaret especially, have grown cold. She avoids the drawing-room now, refuses to sit beneath the new plaque. Poirot gave a small nod. Because symbols speak louder than words, mademoiselle, and symbols rewritten unsettle the heart of tradition. Annabel glanced sideways at him. Do you think Lucio will stay? I believe he came seeking belonging, not inheritance. If you offer the former sincerely, he will not need the latter. They paused beside the hedgerow. Poirot gestured too. A gardener bent over a wheelbarrow of soil near the rose beds. And how is our quiet descendant? Annabel smiled faintly. He's warming. I took him through the gallery yesterday. He stood before Caroline's miniature for almost half an hour. Poirot's brow rose. There is a miniature. Yes, hidden in the butler's study for years. It was meant to be burned according to family rumour, but someone, Loring perhaps, saved it. May I see it? Annabel hesitated. It's in my room now. I'll bring it to you tonight. Poirot bowed. Merci. That night after dinner, Annabel arrived with a small velvet-wrapped frame. She handed it to Poirot in the guest drawing-room, where a fire kept the corners at bay, and Hastings sat nodding off with a mystery novel in his lap. Poirot unwrapped it slowly. The painting was no larger than a postcard. Delicate, precise, a young woman with deep-set, intelligent eyes and a gentle smile, painted in soft oils, her hair pinned in coils. She wore a locket. Her hands held a single white lily. Poirot stared. Not just a daughter. An artist's muse. Perhaps even an artist herself. She painted as a girl, Annabel said. There are sketches hidden in a folio in the attic. I've been sorting through them quietly. Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the portrait. The lily, a symbol of mourning, or purity, or perhaps defiance in gentleness. He touched the edge of the frame. To destroy this would have been an act of true violence. Someone was wise enough not to obey. A sudden knock interrupted them. It was Margaret Talbot. Her face was taut, pale with something more than chill. "There's been an incident," she said shortly. "You'd better come." They followed her through the corridor and into the library. There, scattered across the Persian rug and beneath the reading lamp, lay the family ledger. Torn apart, its pages, many of them, ripped from the spine. In full fireplace nearby, ash still smoked. The scent of scorched vellum hung in the air. Poirot stepped forward at once. He knelt beside the debris. Some pages remained whole, others crumpled and blackened at the edges. Among them lay a half-charred scrap with just a name visible. Caroline Winkham. Annabel gasped. "It's deliberate. They tried to erase her again." Margaret folded her arms. "Only 2 people had access to that volume, besides you, Annabel, Edmund and Arthur." Lord Coniston entered then, summoned from upstairs by the housekeeper. He looked at the mess, the smoke, the stunned faces, and then said very softly, "I didn't do this." Poirot was already lifting pages into a tray. "I believe you, my lord." Hastings stepped forward. "Then who?" Poirot stood. "Someone who believes memory is more dangerous than truth. Someone who fears that if Caroline is remembered, others might be forgotten." Annabel stared at the fireplace. This is vengeance." "No," Poirot said. "This is warning." The next morning, Poirot requested an audience with Loring. the butler. They met in the pantry, a room of polished brass and discipline. Loring, as ever, was immaculate, his posture rigid, his answers measured. "You were here when Caroline Wincombe was sent away," Poirot said. "I was," Loring replied. "And you remember the miniature. You hid it?" A long pause. "Yes, I could not burn it. Because you admired her. Because I believed she would one day be restored." Poirot nodded slowly. "You've served 3 generations. You've seen the cruelties of inheritance and the kindnesses of strangers. Tell me, who would burn the past again?" Loring's eyes darkened slightly. "I have suspicions, but no proof." "Speak freely. I've heard whispers from the east stair at night. Pages turned when no one should be reading. I suspect Edmund." Poirot frowned. "The poet. He dislikes disorder, but he fears revision more. His room is lined with books about legacy, family honour. He speaks kindly of Caroline, but winces when her name is said aloud." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci. You have confirmed what I feared." Later that evening, Poirot asked Edmund Wincombe to join him in the gallery. The room was long, lined with portraits of lords and ladies, lit now by flickering lamps and the hush of winter air. Poirot gestured to the empty frame where Algernon's portrait had once hung. "This house has begun to evolve," he said. Edmund nodded absently. "Too quickly, perhaps." Poirot turned. "You tore the ledger." A beat of silence, then a sigh. "I did. Why?" Edmund looked at the floor. "Because I'm tired of watching this family pretend it can change. We rewrite the walls, but keep the same roots. Caroline was my aunt. I was fond of her. But once you open the door to revision, you invite instability." Poirot's voice was very quiet. "Truth is not instability. It is foundation." Edmund's hands trembled slightly. "Her son is kind, quiet. But what if others follow? What if more claims come?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then they will be welcomed. If not with joy, then with dignity. You feared the past would steal the present." He stepped closer. "But it is not the past that burns books in the night. It is fear. And fear, monsieur, makes a poor guardian of family honour." Edmund turned and left without another word. Poirot stood alone beneath the empty frame. Hastings joined him a moment later. "Well," he said, "another villain?" Poirot shook his head. "No, a protector, misguided, frightened, but not cruel. He sought to preserve the house as he understood it. What he failed to see was that a house must breathe to survive." He looked to the locket in Caroline's miniature, still, resting on the table beside him, and now it does. Chapter 4. The brushstroke beneath the paint. The snow fell steadily outside Coniston Hall the next morning, blanketing the lawns in a quiet, deceptive purity. The air was still, and though the scandal of the burned ledger had died down, Poirot sensed that something beneath the calm continued to stir. Lucio Morelli, son of Caroline Wincombe, had resumed his duties in the garden, and Lord Coniston, though disturbed by Edmund's confession, had not asked him to leave. That, in Poirot's opinion, was a sign of change. And yet he had not come to the end of the matter. Not by far. At breakfast, Annabel joined Poirot and Hastings in the conservatory. She carried under her arm a leather folio, battered at the corners and tied with ribbon. "I found these in the attic," she said. "Drawings, watercolours, some signed by Caroline. Some, I think, are unsigned, but not by her." Poirot opened the folio carefully. Inside were delicate studies, some in pencil, others in ink. Portraits mainly. The same intelligent, long-lashed eyes repeated in profile and three-quarter view. One sketch caught Poirot's attention at once. It showed a man seated before an easel, his face turned slightly from view, yet there was no mistaking the angle of the nose, the narrowness of the frame, the set of the jaw. "This is a portrait of Enzo Morelli," Poirot murmured. Annabel nodded. "It's unsigned, but she must have drawn it. And this?" She turned the page. "This one is odd. It was a landscape, or appeared to be. But upon closer inspection, the trees were too twisted, the ground uneven, the shadows overly stark. In the centre of the frame was something angular and unnatural. A structure, not quite a building, not quite a ruin, and beneath it a small plaque had been drawn." Poirot leaned forward. "No name," he said, "but there's a number. It's 13-7. Strange." Annabel bit her lip. "I thought it might be a room number, but we haven't 3 floors." "Could it be symbolic?" Hastings asked. "A code?" Poirot's fingers traced the drawing's lower edge. "Or a reference to something once buried, something that marked a location." Annabel stood. "There's more in the attic. Boxes of old, items Caroline's mother locked away. May I see them?" "Of course, I'll take you myself." The attic of Coniston Hall was an archive of contradiction. Dusty finery stored beside rusted tools, ancestral gowns hung beside crates of obsolete firearms, all of it tucked beneath sloping beams and shafts of cold light. Annabel led Poirot to a wooden chest beside the window. It bore a broken lock and a faint scent of lavender. "These were Caroline's, I think," she said, "or her mother's. They've been untouched since the 1910s. Poirot opened the lid gently. Inside were letters, handkerchiefs, a pair of gloves, dried flowers pressed into books. And at the very bottom, wrapped in old linen, a canvas. Poirot unwrapped it slowly. It was a painting, unframed, roughly 12 by 16 inches. It showed a study, a room in the house clearly. Poirot recognized the arched fireplace and the angle of the window. And above the mantel, where now hung the new plaque, there was something curious. Another portrait, but this one was not of Lord Algernon. This one was of a woman, tall, dark-haired, with a lily in her hand. "Caroline! Mon Dieu!" Poirot whispered. Annabel leaned in. She painted herself into the room. "No," Poirot said. "She was painted there. This is not her style. The brushwork is different. This was painted by someone else, her husband. Oui, Enzo Morelli. He must have painted it after her death, perhaps from sketches." Poirot turned the canvas over. In the corner was a smudge of blue wax and a faint letter M. "She wanted this to be found," Poirot said, "or perhaps he did." "But why paint her into the drawing-room?" Annabel asked. "She never sat there after she was disowned." Poirot's brow furrowed, because he meant it as a replacement. "A replacement? A protest," Poirot said. "A rival image. Algernon's likeness dominates the room in life, but Morelli painted his wife there instead, in a space that rejected her. It is quietly radical." Annabel looked at the brushwork again. "Do you think he meant to hang this here?" "No," Poirot said. "He never could have, but he may have hidden it." They turned the canvas back over. At the bottom right, just beneath the painted sill, were the same figures from the drawing, the 7. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "We must speak with Loring. At once." The butler was found in the library, meticulously polishing the spines of the surviving volumes from the family ledger. He listened without expression as Poirot described the painting, the number, and the possibility of a hidden compartment or room. "I know the house better than anyone," Loring said. "And yet that code 37. It does strike me as familiar. You believe it is a location?" "Yes. When I first joined the house, there was a storage system for archived items, family trunks, furniture, seasonal garments. Each item was tagged by floor and row. Room 3, row 7, for example, would be in the servants' wing of the upper attic." Poirot stood. "Then we must go there." Loring hesitated. "There is something else, Monsieur Poirot. Something I must tell you." Poirot inclined his head. "I was here the night Caroline left. I did not see the argument, but I heard raised voices. Algernon was furious. But afterward he met with Dr. Corwin, the family physician at the time. They spoke in private, and after that night, Caroline was never mentioned again." "Did Corwin remain in the area?" "No. He left suddenly, 6 months later. The staff said Algernon paid for him to move to Italy." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And you never told anyone?" "No," Loring said, "because I feared what it might mean." Poirot was silent for a moment. "Let us go to room 7. The third-floor attic wing was cold, narrow, and half forgotten. Cobwebs veiled the corners, and dust turned each footprint into a mark of trespass. Poirot, Hastings, Loring, and Sir Annabel crept past crates and boxes until they found the correct partition. "Here," Loring said, pointing to a door. It was locked. "Do you have a key?" "No. This part of the attic hasn't been opened in years." Poirot examined the lock. A simple warded bolt, easily broken. He retrieved a hairpin from his coat. Never let it be said Poirot travelled unprepared. And with careful work, the door clicked open. Inside was a small room, no more than 10 feet square. Dusty shelves, a stool, a broken lantern, and in the far corner, something covered in canvas. Poirot stepped forward and pulled the cover free. Another painting, this time unmistakably Morelli's work. Darker, more intense. It showed Caroline, once again, but this time seated beneath a window, holding something in her lap. A child, her son. Poirot stared in silence. "It was never meant to be seen," he said at last. "Or perhaps it was," Annabel whispered. "When someone was ready." Poirot turned. "Get Lucio. He should see this." When Lucio Morelli entered the attic room and saw the painting, he froze. His breath caught, and his eyes misted. He stepped forward and touched the edge of the canvas. "I remember this," he said softly. "I saw it once, when I was very small. My father kept it in the studio. He told me she loved lilies, that she used to sing when she painted." Poirot nodded. "This is your inheritance, not land, not title, but truth." Lucio looked to Poirot. "What do I do with it?" Poirot smiled. You do what she never had the chance to. You hang it in the light. Chapter 5. A signature in Dusk Coniston Hall awoke the next morning to a stillness more profound than usual. The heavy snow had thickened overnight, muting the landscape under its white hush, and the house itself, long a fortress of unspoken traditions, seemed now to be listening, as though aware of the storm brewing not in the skies, but within its walls. Lucio Morelli's discovery of the hidden portrait, Caroline Winkham with her child, painted with such intimate truth, had changed the tone of everything. It had not been formally presented to the family yet, but word had spread swiftly among the residents, and not everyone was pleased. "I can feel it," Annabel said that morning, standing with Poirot in the sunroom. "There's resentment. Margaret barely spoke at breakfast. Uncle Arthur keeps to his study. Even Edmund hasn't emerged." Poirot nodded, watching the frost crawl across the corner panes. "And yet no one disputes that the painting is hers." "No, they wouldn't dare," she said, "but there's fear now." As if Caroline's face, seen again, has made her real in a way they can't erase this time. Poirot turned to her. "Mademoiselle, have you considered that what we found may not be the end, but the beginning?" Annabel frowned. "Of what?" "Of the real story." Later that day, Poirot found himself summoned to Lord Coniston's study. The room, with its tall bookcases and ever-burning fire, was a haven of stubborn quiet. Arthur Winkham sat at his desk, eyes shadowed, a folded letter in his hand. "You've brought many things into the light, Monsieur Poirot," he said, "only what the house itself wished to reveal." Poirot replied gently. Coniston hesitated. "I don't object to Lucio remaining here, though I'm sure the trustees will balk. But there's something else you should know, something I've kept for decades." He slid the letter across the desk. Poirot unfolded it. It was dated 1905, written in spidery feminine hand. "My dear Arthur, you are the only one who might understand. My father has banished me. But it is not only because of Enzo. He found something, a sketch, something I had hidden. He accused me of shame, of betrayal, of dishonouring the bloodline. But I swear I never meant to deceive. The sketch was not of Enzo. It was of another, one whom he could never forgive me for loving. I am not angry any more. But I am afraid of what he might do if he thinks I will speak. If anything happens to me, let someone know, let someone remember." Caroline Poirot read the letter twice, then a third time. "My friend," he said softly, "why have you kept this hidden, Arthur?" Winkham looked away. "Because I didn't believe it, or rather, I didn't want to. My father was many things, but I thought him incapable of violence." Poirot tapped the letter. "She was afraid. She says it clearly. I thought she was overwrought." Poirot looked up, his eyes now glinting. "But now, after the painting, after the discovery in the attic, do you still think that?" Coniston's jaw tightened. "No." Poirot stood. "May I keep this?" The Lord hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, perhaps you're the one who should finish what we all refused to begin." Poirot met with Hastings in the long gallery that afternoon, where the portraits of forgotten relatives looked down with their usual disapproval. Hastings read the letter in silence. "She loved someone else?" he asked. "Not Morelli?" Poirot nodded. That is the implication, and whatever she drew, whatever her father discovered, was not forgiven. You think she was murdered? Poirot stared at the blank space where Algernon's portrait had once hung. I think she feared more than exile, and I think her death, recorded so plainly as consumption, may need to be revisited. Hastings looked startled, but no one said anything at the time. Because she died in Florence, alone, no family present, no witnesses but a hired physician, the same one her father paid to relocate months later. Dr. Corwin? Oui. Poirot paced slowly. And remember, Hastings, Daniel Corwin was removed quietly, sent to the continent. Algernon said it was to provide care for Caroline's child. But Lucio never met him. No letters, no visits. You think Corwin knew something, I think, Poirot said. He saw something. That evening, Poirot asked Loring for access to the family vault. The records, I mean, Poirot clarified. Burial locations, death certificates, travel receipts. Loring, with a stiff nod, produced a narrow box from the estate office. Poirot spent 2 hours sifting through yellowing papers. There was Caroline's death notice. No medical record. No autopsy. Simply a note from the local registrar in Florence, signed by a Dr. Paolo Bellanti, whom, as it turned out, did not exist in any registry of Italian physicians from the period. Poirot tapped the name. A fiction, he said. Hastings, reading over his shoulder, blinked. You mean Corwin signed under an alias? Precisely, and that suggests premeditation. He knew his name would cast suspicion, so he invented one. Hastings leaned forward. Then Caroline might not have died of illness at all. Poirot folded the paper. She may have died of convenience. The next morning, Poirot gathered the family once more in the drawing-room. Present were Lord Coniston, Annabel, Edmund, Margaret Talbot, and Lucio Morelli, standing slightly apart from the rest. Poirot, in his usual elegance, took his position by the hearth. My friends, he began, I have, as you say, pulled many threads. Some led to lost paintings, others to old secrets. But one thread leads directly to a lie that has endured over 30 years. He held up the letter from Caroline. She feared for her life. She said so clearly. She did not die peacefully in Italy. She died because your patriarch, Lord Algernon, could not bear that she had defied him not once, but twice. First with a marriage, then with a drawing. Edmund scoffed. A drawing? That seems far-fetched. Poirot's gaze was piercing. Might I remind you, monsieur, that to some an image speaks more powerfully than words? What if the sketch showed a stranger, but someone in this very house? Margaret's expression shifted. Poirot continued. What if it revealed Caroline's true love? Someone within reach, within scandal, within bloodline. He turned to Lord Coniston. You are the family historian. You know the relationships best. Was there ever a cousin or ward, perhaps someone closer in age to Caroline than her father preferred? Arthur's face was pale. Yes, he said slowly. My cousin Henry. He lived with us a year. Caroline was 17. He was 20. There were whispers, but no proof. Poirot lifted the letter again. She confessed the sketch was not of Enzo. Then who else? Silence. Poirot turned to Margaret. You have said little, But you have said enough. You knew Caroline's truth, and you hated her for it." Margaret's lips parted. I never hated her." "No," Poirot said gently, "but you feared what she would bring down. You feared her child, and you feared the inheritance of truth." He looked to Lucio. "You are the symbol of all this house tried to erase, and yet here you stand." Poirot drew himself up. "I do not accuse any of you of murder, not in the legal sense. Caroline's death will never be proven by evidence. But morally, her exile, her abandonment, her erasure was a crime of silence. And today, that silence ends." Annabel stepped forward and placed the hidden portrait, Caroline and child, in the empty frame. Poirot smiled faintly. The inverted portrait was never an insult. It was a correction. And now, finally, it is upright. That evening, Poirot and Hastings took tea in the drawing-room. The fire crackled softly. The snow continued its quiet fall. "You didn't name a killer," Hastings said. "No," Poirot replied. "Because sometimes, mon ami, the murderer is not a person, but a system. A code of honor so cold, it forgets compassion." Hastings looked toward the painting. "You think she'd be proud?" Poirot smiled. "I think she already is." Chapter 6. A false frame. The snow that had blanketed Coniston Hall began to thaw by the next morning, leaving long streaks of meltwater across the leaded windows and damp footprints in the stone corridors. But for Hercule Poirot, the air still held a chill, not of weather, but of truth unfinished. The unveiling of Caroline's second portrait had quelled some of the household tension. Lucio Morelli, no longer a question mark in the family's margins, had been offered a permanent position in the gardens by Lord Coniston himself. Edmund had retreated into his writing. Margaret Talbot, however, remained tight-lipped, avoiding the drawing-room entirely. It might have seemed to the casual eye that the matter was now closed. But Poirot's eyes were never casual. That morning, as he examined the portrait once more, now hanging with quiet reverence above the hearth, something unsettled him. He leaned closer to the canvas. The light had shifted since the painting was first placed, and now he could see faint ridges beneath. The surface of the oils, just beneath Caroline's hand, in the shadowed edge of her chair. A ghost of another image, a painted-over object. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "So we have not yet finished, chère madame." He called for Annabel at once. She came quickly, her cheeks flushed. "Is something wrong?" Poirot pointed. "Tell me, this portrait, have you examined it under raking light? Or infrared, perhaps?" She blinked. "No, I simply dusted it." "There is something beneath the visible surface, a prior composition. A painting beneath the painting. Just so. A practice not uncommon, especially for one whose materials were scarce. I believe Enzo Morelli painted over an earlier work, and I wish to know what he erased." Annabel hesitated. "Do you think it was intentional?" Poirot turned from the canvas. "I think Enzo Morelli was a careful man, and careful men do not cover the past unless they have reason." By mid-afternoon, with Lord Coniston's approval, Poirot brought in a local art conservator from Oxford, a Miss Helen Davenish, a brisk woman with keen eyes and paint under her nails. She examined the portrait in silence for nearly 20 minutes. Then she turned to Poirot. "There's definitely a composition underneath. Looks like a male figure. Similar seated pose. Different background, no window. A portrait of someone else? Possibly," she said. "Or an earlier version of this one. Hard to say without testing, but I can remove a few upper layers, if permitted. Please proceed." With practised hands and a delicate blade, she worked for the next hour, carefully peeling back a corner of the uppermost varnish. Then she stopped. Her brow furrowed. "I was right," she said. "But it's not a previous sketch of Caroline." She stepped back to let Poirot see. Beneath the chair, just visible now in the lower left of the canvas, was a man's hand, and in that hand, unmistakably, a revolver. Poirot's expression tightened. "Mon Dieu!" Annabel gasped. "What does that mean?" "It means," Poirot said slowly, "that this portrait was not a tribute. It was a message." Miss Davenish carefully cleaned more of the corner. It was painted quickly, covered even faster. "The gun isn't rendered in detail, but it's there." Annabel's voice was barely audible. "You think Enzo saw something?" Poirot nodded. "Or feared something. Either way, he left a trace." That evening, Poirot requested Lucio's presence in the study. The young man entered quietly, his expression unreadable. He looked first to Poirot, then to the half-revealed canvas now resting on an easel by the fire. "I don't understand," he said. Poirot gestured gently. "Lucio, did your father ever speak of this painting? Of what it meant?" Lucio stepped closer. "He said it was painted after my mother died, that it was how he kept her alive." "And did he ever mention this?" Poirot pointed to the revolver. Lucio's eyes narrowed. "No." Poirot watched him closely. "And yet it was there. Covered. Hidden. Why?" Lucio's fingers clenched. "My father was not a man of violence." "No," Poirot said softly. "But perhaps he feared violence. Perhaps he knew what your mother feared, and tried to preserve a warning." Lucio said nothing. Poirot continued. "I believe your father may have seen something that frightened him. Something involving a gun. Something involving Caroline." Lucio stared at the canvas. "You think she was killed?" Poirot nodded once. "Yes." Later, Poirot sat by the drawing-room fire with Hastings. "I do not yet have proof," he said, "but the clues begin to speak." "The revolver?" Hastings asked. Poirot nodded. "It is not merely the presence of the weapon, it is its positioning. Held, not aimed. Shown, not hidden. It was meant to be noticed by someone who understood the context." Hastings frowned. "But who would carry a gun into a house like this?" Poirot gave a thin smile. "Someone accustomed to control. Someone who would not hesitate to threaten, if not to shoot." "Algernon? Oui. But what if the gun was not his?" Poirot reached into his pocket and retrieved Caroline's final letter, the one sent to Arthur Wincombe. She feared someone else. She spoke of love and shame. Hastings nodded. "The cousin. Henry." "Perhaps," Poirot said. "But what if Caroline was protecting someone else? What if Enzo Morelli's painting was not just a tribute, but an accusation?" Hastings looked startled. "You think the revolver belonged to her?" "I think it is possible." He folded the letter gently. And I think the final piece of this puzzle lies not in the canvas, but in what was never painted at all. The next day Poirot requested one final audience with Margaret Talbot. She arrived coldly, arms folded, her expression set. "What is it this time?" she asked. Poirot smiled politely. "I am closing the investigation, but I wish to ask you something only you can answer." She raised an eyebrow. "And why would I do that?" "Because I believe you have carried a secret for 30 years, and you are tired." She blinked. Poirot leaned forward. "You were Caroline's friend once, before she left, before the exile." Margaret hesitated. "Yes, and you know who she truly loved." "I do." "Who?" A pause, then Dr. Corwin. Poirot's eyes widened. Margaret continued. "They had an affair before she met Enzo. It was brief, but real. Her father found out and forced Corwin to swear silence. He left eventually, but Caroline, she never quite let go." Poirot stood slowly. "Then the letters, the fear. It wasn't Algernon she feared. It was what Corwin might say." Margaret looked down. She wrote to him after her exile. I read one of the letters. She begged him not to confess. Poirot's voice was quiet. "Confess what?" Margaret closed her eyes. "That they had a easy child." The silence in the room was absolute. Poirot sat down again. "You mean Lucio is not Enzo's son?" Margaret nodded. "No, he's Corwin's. Enzo married her to protect the child's identity." Poirot whispered. "Then the real shame was hers and Corwin's, and the family's silence was to protect itself from scandal." Margaret's voice broke. "And she died alone for it." Poirot closed his eyes. "No, not for it. Because of it." He stood. "Thank you, madame. You have brought the final piece into place." That night, Poirot sat alone in the drawing-room beside the portrait. He stared at Caroline's face. And the half-hidden gun, a painting of mourning, yes, but also a painting of mercy. He whispered softly. "You loved and you feared and you protected, even in silence." Then he stood, and for the first time in Coniston Hall's long history, bowed to a portrait not of a lord, but of a woman cast out, and now returned. Chapter 7. The Gallery Meeting. The early morning air was crisp and biting, as Hercule Poirot made his way along the gravel path toward Coniston Hall's gallery. A thin layer of frost coated the grass, sparkling faintly under the faint light of dawn. But within Poirot's heart stirred a warmth born not of the season, but of hope. A hope that the tangled mysteries surrounding the Wickham family were nearing their resolution. He reached the great oak door of the gallery and gently pushed it open. The room was vast and sombre, lined wall to wall with portraits of Winkhams from generations past. The thick carpet muted his footsteps as he approached a lone figure, seated on a small wooden stool near the hearth. A single candle flickered beside the figure, casting soft shadows that danced along the tapestry-laden walls. Lucio Morelli sat hunched forward, his hands clasped tightly, his dark eyes lifted momentarily as Poirot entered. His face, pale in the dawn light, was drawn but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot," Lucio said quietly, standing as the detective approached. "Thank you for coming so early." Poirot bowed with the precise grace that had become his hallmark. Mon ami, the hour matters not when truth calls. You wished to speak in confidence. Lucio nodded. Yes, there are things I must share. Things I could not say until now. Poirot gestured toward a portrait on the far wall, directly opposite where they stood. The oil painting depicted a severe man in formal regalia, Lord Algernon. Wingcomb, his expression stern, his eyes cold and unyielding. This was the man who tore my family apart, Lucio began, his voice tinged with bitterness. Poirot folded his hands and inclined his head. Your investigations have revealed much, Lucio, the story of your mother, the betrayals, the silences. Yet I sense there is more you wish to disclose. Lucio took a breath and straightened. I only recently learned that Enzo Morelli was not my father. Poirot's eyes remained steady, inviting him to continue. My true father was Dr. Daniel Corwin. Poirot nodded slowly, recalling the whispered confession from Margaret Talbot. Indeed, she revealed this truth. Lucio's gaze darkened. Corwin promised to protect us, to keep my existence secret for my safety. But after my mother's death, he vanished. No letters, no visits, just silence. He hesitated, then added quietly, I fear my family will never accept me if they knew. Poirot's smile was gentle but firm. The past is no longer a cage, Lucio. The house, this family, must now embrace truth, however painful. Lucio's shoulders relaxed fractionally. Then I am resolved. I will tell them everything. Poirot's eyes twinkled. And I shall assist you in this, as a friend. The candle flickered low as they spoke in hushed tones, plans forming between them. Poirot advised caution and patience, knowing that such revelations could unsettle the already fragile balance in the household. The great oak doors creaked open, and Annabel entered quietly. I heard voices, she said softly. Is everything all right? Lucio looked to her and smiled wanly. Yes, Annabel. I've spoken with Monsieur Poirot about telling the family my truth. She nodded, her eyes bright. It's brave of you. Poirot turned to her. Mademoiselle, your support will be invaluable. Later that morning, Lord Coniston summoned the family for an urgent meeting in the drawing-room. The air was thick with expectation. Annabel, Lucio, Edmund, Margaret Talbot, Dr. Howard, and Loring the butler assembled. Even Hastings had joined at Poirot's request, serving as a steady presence. Lord Coniston cleared his throat, glancing nervously at Poirot. Before speaking, Family, he began, we face a truth that none of us expected. Lucio has revealed that his father was not Enzo Morelli, but Dr. Daniel Corwin. A gasp swept through the room. Edmund's face paled. Margaret's eyes flashed. Annabel bit her lip. Poirot stepped forward, calm and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, this revelation explains much about the past. The secrecy, the fear, the estrangement. It is time to acknowledge what has long been concealed. Margaret spoke sharply. This is a betrayal to the family name. Annabel countered firmly. It is a truth that deserves recognition, not condemnation. Edmund shook his head. A scandal that will ruin us all. Poirot raised a hand. The scandal lies not in the truth, but in the years of silence and denial. Caroline Wynkham was a woman who loved and was silenced. Her child, Lucio, deserves dignity, not dismissal. Lucio's voice, when he spoke, was steady but resolute. I have no claim to your name or titles, but I ask only to be treated as part of this family, not hidden, not scorned. Lord Coniston, though visibly shaken, nodded slowly. This is difficult for us all, but perhaps the time has come to heal, not to divide. The room fell into thoughtful silence. Days later, Poirot observed from a distance as Lucio began to integrate into the household. He was given a room near the servants' quarters, a compromise that allowed proximity without immediate intrusion. Annabel took it upon herself to introduce him to family traditions, including a small tea ceremony in the morning that gradually softened the edges of suspicion. Margaret remained distant, though Poirot noted that her hostility lessened with time. One afternoon, Poirot and Hastings walked in the grounds. "You sense it too, Hastings?" Poirot asked. "The tentative mending." Hastings smiled. "Yes, but I'd wager the house still holds many secrets." Poirot chuckled softly. "May we? And we shall uncover them in due course." That evening, Poirot sat alone in the gallery, gazing at the now fully revealed portrait of Caroline and her child. He whispered softly, "You have waited long, chère madame, but now your story will not be forgotten." The faintest breeze stirred the curtains, as if the house itself sighed in relief. Chapter 8. Shadows Cast by Truth. The slow march of winter was loosening its grip by early March, but the atmosphere at Coniston Hall was heavy with a weight not eased by thawing snow. The revelation of Lucio Morelli's parentage had sent ripples through the household, unsettling old certainties and exposing fragile alliances. Yet, for all the talk of acceptance and healing, a shadow lingered, an unspoken dread that truth might still harbour darker secrets. Hercule Poirot arrived at the hall one crisp morning, summoned by a note from Annabel. The letter was brief, urgent. "Monsieur Poirot, there has been an incident, something that must not be ignored. Please come at once." Annabel Poirot was not one to delay when summoned thus. He found the household gathered in the grand drawing room, the place where so many revelations had first surfaced. But this gathering was less orderly. Whispers buzzed beneath stiff glances, and several faces betrayed a mixture of fear and frustration. Lord Coniston paced near the fireplace, hands clasped tightly behind his back. Margaret Talbot sat stiffly in a corner, arms folded, eyes darting suspiciously toward the others. Edmund stood near the window, staring out but alert. Lucio looked weary but resolute. Annabel met Poirot's eyes, relief flickering before she quickly composed herself. "Monsieur Poirot," Lord Coniston said as the detective entered, "thank you for coming so promptly. There has been a disturbance." Poirot inclined his head. "Please, tell me." Annabel stepped forward. "Last night, the portrait of Caroline and her child, the one we recently unveiled in the gallery, was defaced." There was a collective gasp. Margaret's voice broke the silence. "Who would do such a thing?" Lucio's jaw clenched. "It's an act of hatred, of denial." Lord Coniston sighed. "It is worse than that. Someone wrote a message across the canvas in black paint." Poirot raised an eyebrow. Annabel swallowed, then revealed a small piece of parchment bearing the cruel inscription, "A bastard's legacy is no legacy at all." The words hung in the air, heavy and hateful. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Anyone seen or heard anything unusual? Margaret spoke up reluctantly. "I was awake late. I heard footsteps in the gallery, but the corridor was empty when I looked." Edmund nodded. "I heard whispers, but could not make out words." Loring, the butler, said quietly, "The maids reported hearing muffled voices in the servants' wing, but no one came forward." Poirot's eyes narrowed. This was a deliberate act, meant to intimidate and to erase. It is no random vandalism. He turned to Lucio. "Monsieur Morelli, do you suspect anyone?" Lucio's voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "Yes, I believe the perpetrator fears what I represent. The truth. Someone clings desperately to the old order." Poirot's expression was grave. "Then we must be vigilant." The investigation that followed was meticulous. Poirot questioned each member of the household as well as the staff, piecing together a timeline for the night's events. The picture emerged slowly, revealing fractures beneath the surface. Margaret Talbot's resentment, once hidden behind polite civility, became more apparent. She was fiercely protective of the family's reputation and expressed deep distrust of Lucio's presence. Edmund confessed to late-night wanderings, troubled by his own conflicted loyalties. He admitted overhearing conversations he would rather forget but withheld names. The maids were frightened, hesitant to accuse. Only one, young Elsie, came forward quietly, revealing she had seen shadows moving near the gallery windows around midnight. Poirot compiled the evidence and then requested a private meeting with Lord Coniston. In the study, with the fire crackling, lo, Poirot laid out his findings. "My lord, the attack on the portrait was not merely hatred toward Lucio, but a message aimed at all who would accept change." Coniston nodded slowly. "I fear this house is not yet ready." Poirot looked into the flames. Change is never easy, but suppression only delays the inevitable. Meanwhile, Lucio found unexpected allies in Annabel and a few of the younger staff. Together, they organized a small gathering to honor Caroline's memory properly, reading her letters aloud, displaying her art, and offering a space for reflection. This event was modest but meaningful, slowly chipping away at walls of prejudice. One evening, as the house settled into uneasy calm, Poirot sat with Hastings by the library fire. "I wonder, Hastings," Poirot said, "how often families bury not just secrets, but fears that poison their very foundations." Hastings nodded, and sometimes the truth is more dangerous than any lie. Poirot smiled faintly. "Exactly. But the truth, once spoken, is like light in darkness. It cannot be put back in its box." Days later, a breakthrough came. Elsie, the maid, nervously approached Poirot with a small scrap of paper she had found near the gallery. On it was scrawled a partial signature. E. W. Poirot's eyes lit. Edmund. Wincombe. He called Edmund for questioning. Confronted with the evidence, Edmund broke down. "I did it," he confessed, "out of fear, out of anger. I thought if I could destroy the symbol, I could destroy the threat." Poirot's voice was calm. But what you destroyed was more than paint, monsieur. You damaged a chance at redemption." Edmund sobbed. "I only wanted to protect my family." The following days saw Edmund begin the slow process of atonement, helping to repair the damaged portrait and publicly apologizing. The family, while fractured, began tentatively to heal. Luccio's position grew stronger, bolstered by those who believed in truth and progress. In the closing pages of the chapter, Poirot reflected on the nature of legacy. In families, as in houses, there are shadows, some born of neglect, others of fear. But it is the courage to face those shadows that brings light. He looked once more at Caroline's restored portrait, now whole and vibrant, and in that light justice is served, not by punishment, but by remembrance. Chapter 9. The Echoes of Silence. The late March sun filtered weakly through the tall, mullioned windows of Coniston Hall's library, casting a pale glow over the scattered documents and portraits that lined the walls. Outside, the grounds were beginning to thaw, the lingering grip of winter loosening its grasp in favour of early spring. But inside the ancient house, the air was thick with tensions, unspoken resentments, and the weight of secrets long buried. Hercule Poirot sat behind the grand oak desk, carefully examining the small slip of paper the maid Elsie had found near the gallery, scratched hastily, yet unmistakably bearing the initials IDEI. GTW. At last, a tangible clue connecting Edmund Wynkham to the attack on Caroline's portrait. Hastings paced the length of the room, his brow furrowed. Poor Edmund! It's clear he acted out of fear, but I wonder, what else is he hiding? Is this act simply a desperate attempt to hold on to the past, or is there a darker motivation beneath? Poirot tapped his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. Fear is a powerful motivator, Hastings. But fear alone rarely causes a man to deface a portrait and risk ostracism. There must be more to Edmund's story. The past does not merely whisper. It sometimes demands retribution. As if on cue, the door opened and Annabel Wincombe entered, her expression serious. "Monsieur Poirot, I've been reviewing Caroline's letters again," she said, crossing the room. "There's one in particular, a letter she wrote to my Uncle Arthur shortly before her death, that I think is important." She placed a folded page on the desk. Poirot unfolded it carefully. "Dear Arthur, there is something I have withheld, not out of shame, but to protect those I love. Yet I fear that silence may be more dangerous than the truth. The night I left Coniston, I was not alone. There was someone else, someone who loved me fiercely, but was cruelly forbidden to protect me. Please be cautious. The house harbours more shadows than we know. Yours, Caroline." Poirot read the letter twice, his sharp eyes glinting. "This changes the narrative, Hastings. There was another presence that night, another person entwined in Caroline's fate." Hastings frowned. Could it be that this someone else is the key to understanding the full story? Poirot nodded. "Indeed, but identifying who this person was requires delicacy. It may explain much about the family's secrecy and Edmund's desperation." Later that afternoon, Poirot requested a private meeting with Margaret Talbot, the cousin who had long carried an air of wary detachment. She entered the library with her usual controlled poise, but Poirot could detect an undercurrent of tension in her movements. "Madame Talbot." Poirot began smoothly. "Your knowledge of Caroline Winkham's final days is remarkable. There is a letter now that suggests another presence on that fateful night. Would you care to shed light on this?" Margaret's lips tightened. "I will say only this, Monsieur Poirot. Coniston Hall is a place of many secrets, some better left buried. Caroline was loved by more than one, but the nature of that love was complex. Some passions here were forbidden, others hidden." Poirot leaned forward, voice soft but insistent. "Is there someone here, perhaps a figure in the family or a close confidant, who played a larger role than has been admitted?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yes, there was a man, Henry Farnsworth, a distant cousin, but close to Caroline in her youth. Their relationship was complicated, strained by family disapproval and whispered scandals." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Henry Farnsworth?" "Indeed. He left the estate shortly after Caroline's exile. Rumours say he fought a duel over her honour. No one speaks of him now." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps it is time to bring him back into the light." The search for Henry Farnsworth proved arduous. He was last known to have emigrated to Australia decades ago, his trail cold. But Hastings, ever resourceful, unearthed an old passenger manifest listing a Henry Farnsworth arriving in Melbourne in 1907. Poirot and Hastings dispatched a discreet inquiry, hoping to learn if the elusive cousin was still alive or had left descendants. Meanwhile, back at Coniston Hall, tensions simmered. Edmund Wincombe's confession and apology had softened some hearts, but Margaret's revelations rekindled old fears. One evening, Annabel confided in Poirot during their walk through the frost-nipped gardens. "Let's talk now," she whispered, and of curses and ghosts. Old family stories revived to scare Lucio away. "I fear not all here are ready to embrace change." Poirot squeezed her hand gently. "Change is the only constant, mademoiselle. The question is whether you will be its agents or its victims." A week later, a letter arrived from Melbourne. Henry Farnsworth was alive but frail, residing in a modest home near the coast. He agreed to return to England, to face his past, his family, and the legacy of Caroline Winkham. His arrival at Coniston Hall was met with mixed emotions. Poirot watched as the aged man, tall but stooped with silver hair and keen eyes, entered the drawing-room. He greeted each family member with a nod, but his gaze lingered longest on Lucio. "Son of my beloved cousin," Henry said softly, voice trembling but clear. "I have lived in regret, but today I come to make amends." The family was silent. Poirot took the moment to speak. "Mr. Farnsworth, your return marks a new chapter. Perhaps together we can finally unearth the truths that have shadowed Coniston Hall for too long." Henry nodded. "My past is heavy, but I am ready." That evening, Henry recounted memories of Caroline, their secret meetings, the family's wrath, the duel fought in her name. He revealed a startling truth. The night Caroline fled Coniston was not just a matter of family disapproval, but a violent confrontation involving Lord Algernon himself. "He drew a pistol," Henry said quietly. "A warning shot, but the trauma broke Caroline's spirit. She escaped, never to return." Poirot listened intently, the revolver in the portrait, he murmured, "a symbol of that moment." Henry looked down. She feared for her life and for Lucio's. In the days that followed, the family began the slow, difficult work of reconciliation. Lucio was recognized openly as Caroline's son and Henry's kin. Edmund and Margaret, too, softened in their opposition. A formal ceremony was planned to honour Caroline's memory, replacing the old portrait of Algernon with a new gallery dedicated to the women and forgotten members of the family. Poirot, reflecting on the events, remarked to Hastings one evening by the fire, "This case has shown, mon ami, that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not of murder, but of memory. The ghosts we carry are not spirits, but silences." Hastings nodded, and only by speaking can we lay them to rest. The final pages of the chapter describe the opening of the new gallery, an event marked by solemn speeches, tears, and the first steps toward healing a fractured lineage. Poirot, watching from a quiet corner, felt a profound sense of closure. The inverted portrait, once a symbol of hidden truths and rebellion, had become a beacon of restoration. Chapter 10. The Last Brushstroke. The spring sun spilled softly through the stained glass windows of Coniston Hall's gallery, illuminating the newly hung portraits that lined the walls. Where once the stern visage of Lord Algernon Wynkham had dominated the room, there now stood an array of faces, women and men, forgotten or silenced, now given their rightful place in the family's legacy. Among them, prominently displayed, was Caroline Wyncombe's portrait with her child, a testament to resilience and truth. Hercule Poirot, standing by the window, surveyed the scene with a quiet satisfaction. The household bustled with activity, staff preparing for the day's commemorative service, family members mingling with townsfolk and dignitaries. It was a celebration not merely of art, but of acknowledgement, justice, and healing. Beside him, Hastings sipped his tea thoughtfully. Quite a transformation, n'est-ce pas? Poirot mused. Indeed, Hastings replied. From shadows to sunlight. Poirot's eyes softened. But the final stroke remains, the confession, the absolution, and the acceptance of all truths. The grand drawing-room filled steadily with attendees. Among them were historians, art conservators, and descendants of the Wynkham lineage. Annabel Wynkham, radiant in a simple but elegant gown, moved gracefully, offering thanks and guiding guests. Lucio Morelli, still quiet but growing in confidence, stood near his mother's portrait, visibly moved. Lord Coniston, now aged and reflective, approached Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice weighted with emotion, "it is thanks to your perseverance that we stand here today. The house, my family, can begin anew." Poirot bowed slightly. "Monseigneur, it was the truth that demanded perseverance, not I. I merely lent my little grey cells to uncover it." A murmur rippled through the crowd as the ceremony began. At the appointed moment, Annabel drew aside a velvet cloth, revealing a large, intricately carved plaque. It bore an inscription in flowing script. "In memory of Caroline Wynkham, 1870–1906, daughter, artist, mother, rebel. Banished but never forgotten, the crowd breathed as if released from a collective burden." Annabel stepped forward to speak. Great-great-grandmother was silenced in her time. Today, we reclaim her voice, her story, and her place. May this house, Remember her not as a shadow, but as a light." Lucio's eyes glistened with tears. Later, away from the crowd, Poirot found Margaret Talbot standing alone by a side window. Her face bore the traces of remorse, yet she carried herself with dignity. "Mademoiselle Talbot," Poirot began gently, "may I have a word?" She nodded. "I have witnessed your courage in facing the truth and standing with the family today. It takes great strength to admit past errors." Margaret's voice trembled slightly. "For too long I clung to pride and fear. I denied the woman who deserved better, and in doing so, I denied myself peace." Poirot smiled. "Peace comes with honesty. You have begun the path." As the afternoon waned, Poirot gathered the family and close confidants in the gallery. With measured words, he recounted the journey, from the inverted portrait to the hidden paintings, the letters and the uncovered truths. "And now," Poirot said, turning to Lucio, "you stand not as a secret, but as a son recognized." Lucio bowed his head, overwhelmed. "But there is one last matter," Poirot continued, "the true fate of Caroline Winkham." He produced the recently discovered medical records from Florence and the letters from Margaret and Henry Farnsworth. These documents suggest that Caroline's death was not by chance or illness alone, but hastened by despair and heartbreak wrought by exile and betrayal. The room fell silent. Poirot's voice softened. "Though we cannot bring her back, we honour her by bringing her story fully into the light, and in doing so, we prevent such shadows from darkening our lives again." That evening, after the guests had departed and the halls had quieted, Poirot and Hastings sat by the fire in the library. Hastings looked pensively at the flickering flames. "Do you think the family will truly change?" Poirot considered. "Change is a slow bloom, Hastings, but the roots have been loosened. With time, the garden will flourish." He reached for a small framed sketch of Caroline's lily. "This," he said, "is not just a flower. It is hope." Hastings smiled. "And justice?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Justice is not always found in courtrooms. Sometimes it is found in courage, in memory, and in the willingness to listen." The next morning, Poirot prepared to leave Coniston Hall. The house, once heavy with secrets, now felt lighter. A place where echoes of the past had been met and finally laid to rest. Annabel and Lucio bid him farewell at the great oak door. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," Annabel said, "for giving us the strength to face our history." Lucio nodded solemnly. "Without you, I would still be a shadow." Poirot smiled. "Mon ami, it was you who chose to speak. I merely showed the way." As he walked down the gravel path toward his waiting carriage, Poirot looked back once more. Coniston Hall stood proud, its windows catching the morning light, a symbol not of division, but of reconciliation. Weeks later, Poirot sat in his London flat, a new letter resting on his desk. It was from Annabel. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, the gallery is complete. Caroline's portrait hangs now at the centre, surrounded by those who came before and after. The house feels whole again. Thank you for your wisdom and kindness. Yours." Annabel Poirot smiled, carefully placing the letter in his case files. He lit his pipe and gazed out the window. "In every portrait," he mused, "there is a story. Sometimes it is the one painted. Sometimes it is the one hidden beneath the strokes, but always there is truth waiting patiently for its moment to be seen. He leaned back, content, for at last the inverted portrait had been righted, both on the wall and in the hearts of those it touched. Chapter 11. The Weight of Memory. The weeks following the gallery's unveiling at Coniston Hall passed with a gentle unfolding of change. But beneath the quiet surface, the currents of history continued to swirl, shaping the lives of those who dwelt within the great stone walls. The house that had once been a fortress of silence now echoed with murmurs. Tentative conversations about forgiveness, about truth, and about the future. Hercule Poirot found himself wandering the grounds on a cool afternoon with Annabel Winkham. The early signs of spring were timid, small green shoots pushing through the thawing earth, the occasional blossom daring to brave the lingering chill. The air held a fresh clarity that seemed to invite new beginnings. Annabel's voice was soft as she broke the silence. "Do you think the past can ever truly be laid to rest, Monsieur Poirot? Or does it linger, like a shadow, no matter what we do?" Poirot stopped and looked upward, at the sky streaked with light clouds. "Memory, mademoiselle, is a curious thing. It is not like a river that can be diverted or a stone that can be removed. It is more like the earth beneath our feet, holding both seeds and stones. We cannot remove the stones, but we can choose carefully which seeds we nourish." She looked down at the path, then back at him. "And what seeds do you think Coniston will grow?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I believe, with care and patience, the seeds of truth and compassion." Annabel nodded. "That is what I hope for." Inside the house, Margaret Talbot had taken it upon herself to assume responsibility for the family archives. What once had been a neglected trove of dust-covered letters, faded photographs, and forgotten memoirs was now the focal point of a quiet renaissance. She moved through the rooms with a new sense of purpose, cataloguing, preserving, and trying to reconcile the shadows of the past with the emerging light. One evening, Poirot found her in the library, seated at a heavy oak table surrounded by piles of old papers. The fire in the hearth flickered, lending a warm glow to the room as she delicately unfolded a stack of letters bound with a faded ribbon. "These," she said quietly, "are letters exchanged between Caroline Winkham and Henry Farnsworth. They paint a picture quite different from the one we had imagined, a tale of love, hope, and despair." Poirot joined her at the table, his keen eyes scanning the elegant handwriting. Margaret began to read aloud, her voice wavering slightly, as she gave life to the words, "My dear Henry, I find in your letters a sanctuary from the coldness of this house. Though the walls close in, my heart finds warmth in your words. One day, I hope we can build a life beyond the shadows cast here, where truth need not be hidden, and love need not be a secret." As the letters continued, the story emerged more vividly. The joy of secret meetings beneath the moonlight, the pain of discovery, the harsh rebuke from Caroline's father, and the eventual exile that tore them apart. Poirot sighed softly. Caroline was a woman ahead of her time, trapped by the constraints of her era. Margaret looked up, eyes glistening. "And yet her courage shines through these pages. I feel I wronged her by holding back the truth for so long, Poirot. placed a gentle hand over hers. "Acknowledging the past is the first step toward peace, madam." Meanwhile, Lucio Morelli was slowly embraced by the household and the community. He had taken to teaching art to the village children, sharing the passion his mother had instilled in him. His quiet presence and genuine kindness began to thaw the suspicions of even the most reluctant family members. Annabel frequently accompanied, him helping to curate the gallery and nurture the connection between past and present. Together, they created an atmosphere of healing and hope. One afternoon, Hastings arrived unexpectedly and found Poirot standing before Caroline's portrait in the gallery. "Have you ever thought, Hastings," Poirot said thoughtfully, "that this entire case is less about unmasking a crime and more about rediscovering humanity?" Hastings smiled, watching the sunlight dance upon the canvas. "Yes, it's as if we've been chasing ghosts only to find the living heart beneath," Poirot nodded. "The greatest justice we offer is often the restoration of dignity to those silenced and forgotten." As spring blossomed fully, the family hosted a garden party in Caroline's honor. Neighbors, friends, and distant relatives gathered beneath a sky brushed with soft clouds, sharing stories, laughter, and memories once buried. Poirot, ever watchful, stood on the fringes, observing the tentative harmony weaving its way through the crowd. The inverted portrait, once a symbol of defiance and hidden truths, had become a beacon of reconciliation. A moment came when Lucio approached Poirot quietly. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," he said simply, "for giving me a place where I am. No longer a secret." Poirot smiled. "It was your courage that made this possible." That night, as the house settled into peaceful slumber, Poirot sat alone in the drawing-room, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. He pulled from his pocket a small, worn sketch of a lily, Caroline's emblem, and studied it carefully. "The lily," he whispered, "not only a symbol of purity, but of hope, endurance, and new beginnings." He closed his eyes and allowed himself a rare moment of contentment. For at last, the inverted portrait had been righted, not only on the wall, but in the hearts of those it touched. Chapter 12. The portrait. Upright spring had fully blossomed across the rolling fields surrounding Coniston Hall. The once bare branches now sported fresh green leaves, and the gardens burst with colour. Daffodils, crocuses, and early tulips waving gently in the warm breeze. Life, it seemed, was renewing itself as surely as the season demanded. Inside the venerable stone walls, the atmosphere had changed profoundly as well. The once heavy silence that had cloaked the family in secrets was replaced by cautious openness. Conversations once muffled and laden with fear had become honest and tentative. Hercule Poirot found himself standing again before the gallery's centrepiece, Caroline Wincombe's portrait. The image of a proud, defiant woman holding a white lily with her son at her side now shone brightly beneath soft, natural light. The reverence this portrait commanded was a far cry from the scorn it had once provoked when inverted and defaced. Poirot's sharp eyes took in every brushstroke and detail. This painting was no mere artwork. It was a testament, a story of exile, love, and ultimate redemption. Behind him, the door creaked, and Annabel Wincombe entered quietly. Monsieur Poirot, she said, the family and community are preparing for the dedication ceremony today. It is to be a celebration not just of Caroline, but of truth and reconciliation. Poirot smiled gently. Mademoiselle Annabelle, this house has undergone a transformation. It is no longer a prison for secrets, but a home for remembrance. Great Hall was filled with friends, neighbours, and distant relatives, each carrying their own memories and interpretations of the long-buried family saga. Lord Coniston, older and visibly softened by time and regret, stood beside his niece as the guests gathered beneath the vaulted ceiling. Lucio Morelli, now accepted and embraced, quietly observed from a place of honour near Caroline's portrait. His expression was one of calm determination and fragile hope. The ceremony began with a reading from a collection of Caroline's letters, selected and read aloud by Margaret Talbot, her voice steady but emotional. "I find in your letters, Henry," she read, "a sanctuary from the coldness of this house. Though the walls close in, my heart finds warmth in your words." As the final line was spoken, the room seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the woman who had suffered so long in silence. Poirot watched the faces around him. Some were tearful, others contemplative. All had been touched by the journey. Afterward, Annabelle stepped forward and spoke to the assembly. "Today we reclaim Caroline Wincombe's story. We honour her courage and the truth that could not be hidden. May her legacy remind us all to face our past with honesty and compassion." Applause filled the hall, genuine and warm. Later, as the guests dispersed and the house quieted, Poirot and Hastings sat in the library by the fire, reflecting on the case's conclusion. "Do you think, Hercule," Hastings asked, "that justice has truly been served here?" Poirot smiled. "Justice, mon ami, is a delicate thing. It is not always found in the punishment of the guilty. Sometimes it is the restoration of dignity." Hastings nodded thoughtfully. "It took courage to bring the truth to light, and more courage to accept it." "Indeed," Poirot said. "The house that embraces its history, no matter how painful, creates a foundation on which healing can grow." He paused and looked at the framed sketch of a lily resting on the mantelpiece. Caroline's symbol was a flower of hope. Like that flower, truth can bloom even in the harshest conditions. In the days that followed, Lucio began to settle, fully into the household, teaching art classes to local children and organizing exhibitions of his mother's works. Annabelle's passion for preserving family history led her to establish a small museum in the village, dedicated to those whose stories had been lost or forgotten. Margaret Talbot dedicated herself to mending broken relationships within the family, her own transformation a testament to the power of truth. Even Edmund Wincombe, once sceptical and guarded, found peace in his writings, penning a memoir that candidly recounted the family's journey through darkness into light. One crisp morning, Poirot received a letter from Annabelle. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, the gallery, the museum, and the renewed family bonds are thriving. Caroline's portrait hangs proudly, a symbol of resilience. We remain forever grateful for your insight and kindness. Yours sincerely, Annabelle Wincombe Poirot." Placed the letter in his case files and lit his pipe. As smoke curled upward, he gazed out the window at the bustling London streets below. In every life, he mused softly, there are hidden portraits, stories untold, truths obscured. It is the role of the detective not merely to solve puzzles, but to reveal the humanity within. He smiled to himself, content. For at last, the inverted portrait was upright, both on the wall and in the hearts it had touched. Chapter 13. The quiet reckoning spring's gentle light filtered through the tall windows of Coniston Hall, illuminating the vast drawing-room where the family now gathered with a newfound sense of openness. The heavy atmosphere that once blanketed the house had begun to lift, replaced by an air tinged with tentative hope, and the quiet reckoning that follows hard truths. Hercule Poirot stood apart from the crowd, his keen eyes observing the subtle shifts, the softened glances exchanged between cousins, the reluctant smiles shared by former adversaries, and the gentle acceptance in the eyes of Lucio Morelli, who now carried the dignity long denied him. It had been many months since the truth of Caroline Wincombe's exile, and the secrets woven into the family's past were laid bare. Yet the wounds, though healing, still throbbed beneath the surface, reminding all present that reconciliation was a journey, not a destination. The afternoon sun warmed the wooden floors as Annabel Wincombe approached Poirot quietly. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "there are moments when I wonder if the past truly can be forgiven. Some among us still carry the weight of anger and loss too heavily." Poirot nodded, folding his hands thoughtfully. "Forgiveness is not the erasure of memory, mademoiselle, but the acceptance of it. The past shapes us, but it does not have to imprison us." Annabel sighed. "I wish that were true for everyone." Gichier, detective's gaze was gentle but firm. "Change is slow, especially when forged from silence and pain, but the courage to face the truth is the first and most important step." Meanwhile, Edmund Wincombe had secluded himself in the library, pouring his thoughts into journals that would one day tell the story of the family's long road from secrecy to light. His usual guarded demeanour was softened by the vulnerable honesty he now allowed himself. Margaret Talbot, too, spent many hours reflecting on her own role in the family's history. Once defensive and closed, she now sought conversations with those she had wronged, striving to build bridges where once there had been walls. Poirot observed these shifts with quiet approval, understanding that true justice often came not from legal judgment, but from personal reckoning and transformation. One evening, the family gathered for a simple dinner, a stark contrast to the formal banquets of old. The conversation was easy, laughter occasionally breaking through the gentle clinking of cutlery. Lucio spoke of his plans to expand the local art classes, hoping to inspire a new generation with the beauty his mother had loved so dearly. Annabel shared her ambitions to continue preserving the family's history with honesty and openness. Even Lord Coniston, once stern and unyielding, seemed lighter, his eyes reflecting a man coming to terms with his past failings. Poirot, seated quietly at the head of the table, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Later, as the household settled for the night, Poirot and Hastings took a quiet walk through the moonlit gardens. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of blossoms and earth. "Have you ever seen such a transformation, Hercule?" Hastings asked. from silence and suspicion to this, almost a family united. Poirot's eyes twinkled in the moonlight. Is the work of time and truth, Hastings, and the bravery of those willing to face their own shadows. They paused beneath a blooming magnolia tree. "Do you think this house will ever be free of its ghosts?" Hastings asked. Poirot considered. Ghosts, like memories, never truly leave. But with acknowledgment, they lose their power to harm. The following days brought small but meaningful gestures. A repaired wing of the house dedicated to forgotten family members, a mural painted by local artists depicting the story of Caroline Wincombe, and a scholarship fund established in her name to support young women pursuing the arts. The village itself embraced the change, with townsfolk speaking openly of the family's history and celebrating the courage it took to confront it. Poirot found himself drawn to these developments, seeing in them the fruits of patience and persistence. One afternoon, Annabel visited Poirot in the gallery. "Monsieur Poirot, do you ever tire of uncovering dark secrets?" she asked. He smiled gently. "On the contrary, mademoiselle. For every shadow revealed, there is an opportunity to bring light." She looked around at the portraits lining the walls. "Do you think we are finally free?" Poirot's gaze lingered on Caroline's portrait. "Free, no, but at peace, yes, and that is a greater gift than many realize." As the chapter drew to a close, Poirot sat in his study at Whitehaven Mansions, penning his reflections. He wrote of the inverted portrait and its symbolic journey from defiance to acceptance, of a family scarred by silence but healed by truth, and of justice not always served by courts, but by courage, remembrance, and the willingness to change. The story of Coniston Hall, he knew, was one that would endure, not as a tale of scandal, but as a testament to the power of reconciliation. Chapter 14. The portrait restored the days had grown longer, and spring was settling fully over the English countryside surrounding Coniston Hall. The once cold and sombre house now held a lightness, a fragile peace born of truth finally told and wounds gently tended. The gallery where Caroline Wincombe's portrait stood, a symbol of defiance, exile, and ultimately redemption, had become a sanctuary of memory and hope. Hercule Poirot stood quietly in the gallery, his eyes tracing the contours of the painting. It was no longer merely a picture on the wall. It was a story made visible, a testament to resilience and love in the face of cruelty and silence. Behind him, footsteps approached. Annabel Wincombe's voice was soft yet sure. "Monsieur Poirot, the family wishes to thank you. Without your insight and determination, we might still be trapped in shadows." Poirot turned, his delicate smile touched with a hint of melancholy. "Merci, mademoiselle. The true thanks belong to those who had the courage to speak and to listen." She nodded, glancing around the gallery. "This place feels alive now, as if the house itself breathes anew." Poirot's gaze drifted to the other portraits, faces of ancestors who had once dictated rigid rules and silent suffering. The house has learned a new language, one of acknowledgement and healing. The final gathering was modest, a luncheon in the sunlit conservatory, attended by close family and friends. Conversations flowed freely, without the old guardedness. Laughter, tentative at first, grew more genuine. Lord Coniston, weathered but softened by time, raised his glass. To Sir Caroline Winkham. May her story remind us all that silence can be broken, and truth embraced. Glasses clinked softly. Lucio Morelli, standing beside Annabel, caught Poirot's eye and smiled, a smile full of hope and quiet strength. Later, as twilight painted the sky in hues of rose and violet, Poirot and Hastings walked the estate grounds, the air fragrant with blooming lilacs. "You see, Hastings," Poirot said, "justice is not always the swift hand of punishment. Sometimes it is the patient work of restoration." Hastings nodded. "It's the kind of justice that changes lives." "And changes legacies." They paused beneath an ancient oak tree, its branches reaching wide. Coniston Hall will never forget its past, Poirot reflected. But now it honours all who shaped it, those remembered and those rediscovered. Back in London, Poirot settled into his study, a fresh case file beside him. But for once he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He carefully placed a letter from Annabel in his casebook. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, the gallery thrives, and the family is united in ways I never dared hope. Caroline's portrait is no longer inverted, on the wall or in our hearts. With deepest gratitude, Annabel." He smiled and lit his pipe. In every mystery, he mused aloud, there is more than a puzzle to solve. There is a truth to reveal, a humanity to restore. He leaned back, content, for at last the inverted portrait was upright, both in the halls of Coniston and the hearts of those it touched. Chapter 15. Epilogue. The quiet aftermath. The gentle murmur of spring had long since faded into the warm embrace of early summer, by the time Hercule Poirot returned once more to Coniston Hall. The estate, bathed in golden sunlight, stood transformed, not just in its outward appearance, but in the spirit that now animated its ancient halls and gardens. The heavy shroud of secrecy and sorrow that had long clung to the Winkham family had lifted, replaced by an air of tentative hope and restored dignity. Poirot walked slowly through the gardens, where vibrant blooms swayed lightly in the breeze, and the song of birds filled the air. The same grounds that had witnessed so much pain and silence now held a new promise, that of healing and remembrance. As he approached the grand house, he was greeted by the familiar warmth of Annabel Winkham, her bright smile reflecting the changes that had taken root within the family. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her eyes shining, "it feels as though the house itself breathes easier these days." "Indeed, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "The air is clearer when truths are spoken and accepted. This house, and those who dwell within it, have come through a long night, and now face the dawn. Inside, the gallery that had once been a place of hidden truths and inverted images now stood as a testament to courage. Caroline Winkham's portrait, upright and honoured, was surrounded by tributes, letters, sketches, and tokens of remembrance that told the full story of a life once silenced but never erased. Visitors from near and far had come to pay homage, drawn by the tale of love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Lucio Morelli, now fully embraced as both son and artist, had established a small workshop within the estate, where he taught local children to see the world through the eyes of a painter. His gentle guidance and devotion to his mother's legacy had woven him tightly into the fabric of the community, bridging old divides and building new connections. Poirot found himself reflecting on the many lives touched by the case. The reluctant, family members who faced their fears, the servants who kept watchful eyes, and the silent voices of the past finally given sound. Justice, he realized, had been served not through accusation or punishment, but through understanding and reconciliation. That evening, as the sun set behind the rolling hills, Poirot sat in the great drawing-room, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Hastings joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. "To justice," Hastings toasted quietly. "To justice," Poirot echoed, eyes thoughtful. "Do you think the house will ever be free of its ghosts?" Hastings asked. "Ghosts, like memories, are never truly gone," Poirot replied. "But when acknowledged, they lose their power to haunt. The true peace lies not in forgetting, but in remembering rightly." As the fire crackled softly, the 2 friends sat in companionable silence, surrounded by the echoes of a story that had finally found its rest.